There are moments in sports history that stop time, but few moments have ever left the world as silent as what happened in the summer of 2007. A hero of millions, a champion of discipline, respect, and technical perfection. And yet the headlines told a story too horrific to believe. June 25th, 2007. Police enter the home of wrestling legend Chris Benoit in Fayetteville, Georgia. Inside, they find 3 bodies. Chris, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son, Daniel. The man once celebrated as the crippler had reached the darkest chapter of his life. But what really happened inside that house? And how could one of the most admired athletes in wrestling history lose control so completely? Tonight, we open the autopsy files, the toxicology reports, and the hidden years of pain behind the public smile of a man who gave everything to his craft and lost everything in return. Chris Benoit was born on May 21st, 1967, in Montreal, Canada. He grew up quiet, meticulous, and intensely focused, a boy who found comfort in precision. When his family moved near Edmonton, Alberta, he discovered Stampede Wrestling, a local show that changed his life. There he saw the Dynamite Kid, a smaller man among giants, but fast, fearless, and brutally technical. That was the moment Chris decided, I want to be that man. At 18, he trained in Stu Hart's dungeon, a legendary basement gym where pain was a teacher and perfection a religion. By his early 20s, he was already touring Japan, learning a style that mixed athleticism and pure endurance. Every leap from the top rope, every slam on the mat, built his name and broke his body. His signature move, the flying headbutt, thrilled crowds, but caused impact after impact to his skull and neck. He performed it thousands of times. It would later become one of the silent killers inside his brain. In the early 90s, Benoit joined Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW, a brutal playground where pain was part of the performance. During one infamous match, he accidentally fractured the neck of another wrestler, Sabu. It was an accident, but promoters saw an opportunity. They gave him a new identity, the Crippler. To fans, it sounded powerful, but for Chris, it became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. Years later, he would sign with WWE, where his discipline and intensity earned him respect from everyone. He wasn't a loud entertainer, he was a craftsman. In 2004, at WrestleMania 20, he finally achieved the dream, World Heavyweight Champion. Confetti fell from the ceiling as he embraced his best friend, Eddie Guerrero. 2 men who had fought together for decades, finally at the top. That night symbolized everything Chris had ever wanted. But only 3 years later, both men would be gone. Outside the ring, Benoit's life was complex. He fell in love with Nancy Sullivan, a glamorous wrestling valet known as Woman. Ironically, she met him through a storyline. Her then-husband, wrestler Kevin Sullivan, wrote a plot pairing Nancy with Chris for dramatic effect. Reality blurred with fiction, and soon the storyline became real. Nancy left her husband, and she and Chris built a new life together. In 2000, their son Daniel was born. Friends described Chris as a devoted father, gentle, proud, always showing photos of his boy. At home, though, the relationship began to shift. Nancy told friends she felt isolated. Her text messages revealed frustration and fear, mood swings, paranoia, control. At one point, she filed for divorce and an order of protection, citing aggression and erratic behavior. She later withdrew both. What no one realized was that Benoit's mind was already changing, not from fame, but from damage hidden deep inside his skull. Professional wrestling demands superhuman endurance, nearly 300 shows a year, endless flights, constant injuries. In 2001, Benoit ruptured a disc in his neck. Surgeons fused 2 vertebrae with a titanium plate, warning him to rest for months. He refused. Instead, he pushed harder, training through agony with the help of hydrocodone, a strong opioid painkiller. To maintain his build, he injected testosterone and human growth hormone, substances later found in his home. His autopsy would show elevated testosterone levels and testicular atrophy, both clear signs of long-term anabolic steroid use. Those chemicals alter the brain's balance of aggression and emotion. When combined with opioids and sedatives, the results can be catastrophic. Toxicology confirmed both hydrocodone and alprazolam, better known as Xanax, in his blood. Nancy had them too. And so did Daniel. The child had a measurable dose of Xanax, suggesting he had been sedated before losing consciousness. It was not a random explosion. It was planned, deliberate, and unbearably tragic. Then came November 13th, 2005. The day Eddie Guerrero died. Eddie wasn't just a colleague. He was Benoit's brother in spirit. They had shared locker rooms, victories, and long road trips that felt like family. His sudden death from heart failure shattered Chris completely. Nancy bought him a devotional notebook. Inside, he wrote, "I will be with you soon." From that day, Benoit's world turned darker. He became distant, suspicious, often sitting alone in locker rooms, staring at the floor before matches. He began taking Xanax to sleep. Friends noticed his eyes, vacant, exhausted, haunted. He had survived thousands of physical hits, but was losing the invisible fight inside his head. June 19th, 2007. Chris steps into the ring for what will be his final televised match. After the show, colleagues see him drinking tequila. Unusual for a man who rarely touched alcohol. Something feels off. June 21st. Back home in Georgia, arguments intensify. Nancy sends texts mentioning his steroid use and violent moods. June 22nd. She makes unanswered calls to a neighbor, to the local police department, as if seeking help but never finishing the call. Hours later, she's gone. Her body later shows ligature marks and traces of medication that may have rendered her unable to resist. June 23rd, Benoit drugs Daniel and ends the boy's life quietly. That same day, he sends messages to co-workers claiming his family is ill and that he missed his flight. He searches online for a Bible passage about Elijah bringing a child back to life. June 24th, around 4:53 a.m., he walks into his home gym. He wraps a cord from a weight machine and performs the final act of his life. By June 25th, after no response to multiple calls, police arrive for a welfare check, and the world changes forever. The scene inside the Benoit home was quiet when investigators entered, but the silence carried the weight of something unthinkable, a life that had come apart piece by piece. As crime scene technicians moved through the house, they found evidence of deliberate sequence, not chaos. A weekend of destruction carried out in calculated stages. And inside that timeline lay a mystery no one in the wrestling world could understand. How did a man built on discipline, respect, and focus fall into something so catastrophic? The autopsies began at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Forensics Division. Dr. Michael Hunter, a world-renowned forensic pathologist, was among those who reviewed the reports. Each detail would reveal how Chris Benoit's final days had unfolded. Nancy Benoit, age 43, her cause of death, ligature strangulation. Bruising on the neck and wrists showed she had been bound, yet her body lacked the injuries expected from a struggle. Toxicology revealed traces of hydrocodone, alprazolam, and a small amount of alcohol, enough to sedate her, perhaps preventing resistance. Daniel Benoit, just 7 years old, was found in his bed. The medical examiner noted no defensive wounds, and the cause of death was manual compression of the neck. Toxicology measured 0.11 milligrams per liter of alprazolam in his bloodstream. He had been gently drugged before losing consciousness. Finally, Chris Benoit, age 40, was discovered in his home gym. The cause of death: asphyxia due to hanging. There were no signs of external assault, and every indicator confirmed he alone had carried out the sequence of events. His blood tested positive for hydrocodone and alprazolam within normal therapeutic ranges, not overdosed, not accidental. But one additional finding stood out: testosterone consistent with injection. The body showed atrophy of the testes, a symptom of prolonged steroid use. That suggested Benoit had been using anabolic hormones for years, likely to maintain strength while his body broke down. Forensic toxicologists began piecing together the chemical puzzle inside his system. Hydrocodone, a narcotic painkiller, alprazolam, a sedative used for anxiety, and synthetic testosterone, a hormone linked to aggression, mood swings, and impaired judgment. Individually, these drugs can calm pain, ease fear, or build muscle. Combined, they create what experts call a perfect psychological storm, a mixture that amplifies emotion while suppressing impulse control. Dr. Hunter noted that this cocktail, paired with years of brain trauma, could have created a volatile, unstable state. It was not just a moment of rage, it was chemistry turning against its host. Among the evidence recovered from the home were multiple bottles of steroids and syringes prescribed by a local physician, Dr. Phil Aston, who later lost his medical license for reckless overprescription. Records showed both Chris and Nancy had been given the same medications, painkillers and sedatives, often at overlapping doses. The picture was clear: two people medicating chronic pain, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. But in Chris's case, those drugs were colliding with something far worse: invisible brain damage from decades of impact. After the tragedy, researchers at the Sports Legacy Institute in Boston obtained samples of Benoit's brain. Under the microscope, they saw something alarming: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. The tissue showed severe degeneration, equivalent to what doctors see in an 85-year-old with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Sections of his frontal and temporal lobes, the areas responsible for memory, judgment, and emotion, were shrunken and scarred. For years, Chris had performed his signature move, the diving headbutt, launching himself headfirst from the top rope. Thousands of collisions, each one shaking the brain against the skull. Every match, another microscopic tear. Over time, those injuries built into irreversible structural damage. CTE alters the way the brain processes emotion. It can produce paranoia, confusion, explosive anger, and, in extreme cases, a complete loss of self-control. To those who knew him, Benoit's transformation now made haunting sense. The growing paranoia, isolation, the short temper, the forgetfulness. His brain had been deteriorating, cell by cell, while the world applauded his discipline. When Dr. Hunter reviewed the full set of evidence, autopsy, toxicology, and neurological findings, he came to a conclusion that stunned even seasoned investigators. Chris Benoit's death was the product of a catastrophic convergence of medical, chemical, and psychological collapse. Severe brain injury from repeated trauma, compounded by long-term steroid use, pain medication, and untreated depression. In simple terms, his body and mind had been at war with each other. The brain damage caused impulsivity. The drugs removed inhibition. The steroids inflated aggression. The depression darkened his thoughts. Together, they erased the careful control that once defined him. This was not a sudden explosion of anger. It was the end of a man whose identity had been consumed by physical destruction, a mind corroded by impact, chemicals, and grief. In the days that followed, the wrestling world was paralyzed. At first, WWE aired a tribute show, unaware of the true circumstances. When police confirmed the sequence of events, the company removed Benoit's name from broadcasts, websites, and promotional material. Within weeks, every trace of his career vanished from official archives. Behind the scenes, the organization implemented a strict wellness policy, banning anabolic steroids, introducing mental health evaluations and testing for concussions. The sport had been forced to confront its hidden epidemic of pain, drugs, and silence. For the families and fans, though, the questions never stopped. How could the same drive that made him a champion also destroy him? How many others might be living with the same invisible brain damage? Researchers later confirmed CTE in other athletes, football players, boxers, even younger wrestlers, proof that Benoit's case was not isolated, but a warning of what prolonged trauma can do to the human brain. More than a decade later, the name Chris Benoit still divides opinion. To some, he remains one of the greatest technical wrestlers who ever lived, a man whose precision and passion were unmatched. To others, he is a reminder that even heroes can be consumed by the very thing that made them extraordinary. Doctors now use his case as a benchmark for understanding the psychological consequences of sports trauma. Every concussion study, every brain injury protocol in modern wrestling carries his shadow. The tragedy also changed the conversation about masculinity in sports, the silent expectation to endure pain without question, to medicate instead of heal. Benoit embodied that culture until his body and mind could no longer keep pace. In the end, the story of Chris Benoit is not just about a single weekend, it's about the slow erosion of a man from the inside out. A life built on discipline, eroded by damage he couldn't see. A heart full of love, tangled in a brain that could no longer understand it. The man who once symbolized strength became the ultimate warning of fragility. When doctors looked at his brain, they didn't just see the end of a wrestler, they saw the cost of an entire industry. A mind fractured by performance, by pain, by the pursuit of perfection. And in that discovery, perhaps, lies the most painful truth of all. Chris Benoit didn't simply lose control. Control slowly disappeared with every impact, every injection, every unhealed wound. He wasn't defeated by an opponent. He was defeated by the sport he loved. In memory of Nancy and Daniel Benoit, if you or someone you know is struggling, reach out for help. You are not alone.